different members of this coaching staff have different connections with Sonny Dykes or Rhett Lashley or Kevin Kane. You have the unique perspective of having played for Sonny Dykes. How is it different coaching for him as opposed to playing for him? How's your relationship different?
Well, you know, as a player, it's more on the surface. You know, it's kind of jokes, and we had a relationship, but he was more of, you know, giving me advice, being a mentor, pushing me. You know, more of that type of role. Now, once you become a coach, it becomes more personal. You know, you get to know each other, you hang out a lot. Me and him, you know, have spent a good bit of time together. I would say he's my biggest mentor in terms of, you know, being a coach and just being a person, being a good person, being a good father, being a good brother, and he's taught me a lot. But I would say the relationship is probably now a little bit more professional now, you know, but he knows me as a coach and he knows me as a person, and, you know, I'd leave it about there. I mean, he knows what I can do. He's taught me everything I know, you know. I pretty much just regurgitate everything he says. So when it comes to being a coach, I think he's got a lot of trust in how I do things and what I say, just because it's pretty much what he says. I think that's what a lot of the coaches in this system can agree on is, you know, they've just been a part of a system that's been around for a long time and has worked developing receivers, and so I think there's a bit of trust there, knowing that I'm saying what he would say, you know.
You played for him at Louisiana Tech. You coached for him at Cal. Is he the same guy he was when you first met him, or have you seen significant changes in Coach Dykes?
Well, I think when you're a coach, you're constantly trying to grow and become better. I mean, you're never trying to be the same guy. And so obviously he's, throughout his journey and throughout his career, he's grown and he's constantly learning, and he's gotten better and better as a leader and as a coach, just like everyone else would in his role, you know. Guys that, you know, I've worked under, you know, would probably say the same about Coach Patterson and Coach Whittingham. You know, they're completely different from their first year to their 20th year, you know. And I've seen him, you know, get better just like everybody else.
You spent last year at TCU as an offensive analyst working with the quarterbacks?
Yes, sir.
And then Coach Dykes gets hired at SMU. How long did it take before he called you or you called him, and that marriage ended up bringing you across the Metroplex?
It's pretty quick. I mean, we're in the same room, so. I'd say about a week.
Was there even a sales pitch to be made, or, I mean, you know him so well, was it a snap decision?
You know, no. I mean, I kind of looked at it either or, you know. TCU was such a great place, and working for Sonny Cumbie was so awesome. And so, you know, however long it took, I just sat there and felt like I was in a very fortunate position. I felt very blessed to be where I was at, you know. And so if he called, I'd be really, really happy because it's my first gig, you know. And if he didn't, I'd also be happy because working at TCU and working for Gary Patterson and Sonny Cumbie was a great experience, and I enjoyed it, and I wouldn't mind doing it again. But you know, this was just a huge opportunity. I was very, I felt proud because he didn't hesitate, you know. I mean, within a week, he called, and so I felt blessed. It was a very, like, gratifying and fortifying moment for me, knowing that, you know, he didn't hesitate at all to call me. So.
You come to SMU, which has not had a player leave early for the draft in about 30 years. Now there's 2 of them this year, and they're both at your position. How do you resist the temptation to think about what your job might be if either Courtland Sutton or Trey Quinn was still here, or both?
Yeah. Well, it would certainly be easier. You know, I haven't had much chance to get to know either of them. I've watched them from afar, watched them when I was at TCU, and, you know, obviously watched a lot of film of them when they played here, and they're just very, very good players, very good athletes. You can tell how much they love the game, and I think their passion for the game really fueled them to become what they are now, you know. And you know, it hurts to watch guys like that leave, but it also makes it fun, you know, because, you know, as a coach, you want to make guys better, and you want to raise them to that level, and so, you know, there's both sides of the fence to it.
The offense Rhett Lashley runs sort of comes from the same Gus Malzahn scheme that the previous SMU coaches used. But you played in Sonny Dykes' air raid, or version of it, at La Tech. Specifically to the receivers, how different are those two systems?
Well, I played in 3 different types of air raids. I mean, there's every coach, every offensive coordinator. I mean, every offense is completely different. And then, you know, I've worked under Troy Taylor at Utah, and then Sonny Cumbie at TCU, and I think what I've come to learn is whether it's air raid, whether it's spread, they're all different, and there's 100 different kinds of ways to run an offense. And I think you can argue that, you know, Lashley's version of the spread is completely different from the other guys, and so to me, it's just a matter of how good can we get at what we do, not are we the spread or are we the air raid, you know. I think there's strengths and weaknesses to both, and you just try and figure out who you are and get really good at what you can do. I think both systems really focus on figuring out what they have in terms of players, and then designing the offense around that player. So the flexibility between the offenses is probably the most common theme.
It's easy to look at Courtland, Sutton, and Trey Quinn taking 64% of last year's receptions out the door, but you've got a group of guys who you've been working with through spring, and of the guys returning from last year, James Prochet had 40 receptions. The rest of the receivers had 12. Is it too simplistic to say that the success of your group starts at least with James? Does he have to be the number one guy?
Well, it certainly helps because he has experience, and I think growing as a man and as a player, experience is huge. Now, that doesn't mean he's going to be the best player next year. He has the work ethic and the drive to be that guy, but it just remains to be seen. There's so much time in between then and now, and he's got a lot to work on, just like the other guys. You know, he's got to get used to, you know, not being the guy in the background. He's got to be used to, you know, taking on the blunt of the reps, and, accepting that responsibility, you know. And then we got guys coming in that will help, you know, will help the competition and help push everybody and make sure that nobody's comfortable. And I give credit to a lot of the other guys that haven't played, because they have been putting in work, and they've been hungry, and it's pushed them really hard, and they've gotten better. So it's going to be exciting to figure out who steps up and who doesn't, you know. It really is hard to tell, though, when you're so thin in the spring, you know. When you have spring ball and you're only rotating 6 receivers, I mean, it's hard to evaluate what they can do, because they're not full speed, and, you know, they're getting worn down. And so it'll be exciting to get, you know, we're going to have a good group of walk-ons come in, we're going to have some grad transfers come in, and we'll have some receivers that we signed come in that, you know, will push people, and they'll have to put in a lot of work, but then we'll also have depth, and we'll be able to develop guys much faster. And so the good thing about the guys that we have now, and guys like James, is he's gotten an unbelievable amount of reps. So, I mean, we have all this spring and all the reps he's gotten, which has probably been the most reps he's ever had in his life, and he's got all the summer and then a fall camp to get ready for a season, he better be ready to play, you know. So it's our job to get him there.
You sort of hinted at what I was going to ask next, where he had an effective year last year in part because of all the attention paid to Sutton on one side and Quinn on the other side. What do you know about James's personality and demeanor, and what can you tell about how he'll be able to handle,
Yeah.
like you said, being the guy? At least at the beginning of the year, he'll be the focus of of defense's attention.
Yeah, I think you just got to really you got to raise your game up, and you got to be the key to a receiver to me is being extremely consistent, and being in such good shape that you can handle, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 reps in a row without losing your step, and without losing your focus, and so, he's got to get to a point where he can play full speed. He can do it for a number of plays, but his biggest deal is being mentally strong and being consistent and being the same guy every play. Because now, you can have a bad play, but you're in the front now. You're in the forefront. So if you want to be the go-to guy, if you want to be a really good receiver, you have to be the same guy every play. You have to be consistent. You have to run the same routes, and you have to do what the quarterback expects you to do every single play. And there's less room for error now, So I think he's got to accept that. He's got to understand that, and he's got to feel like he hasn't arrived yet, and he's got to push himself even harder, and understand that the margin of error for him is really small, because you're not in the background anymore. You're being put in the front, and if you either can handle that, or you can't, in my opinion.
You've got a group that's not only small in numbers, but pretty young. James, Myron Galliard, and Alex Honey will be juniors. I think you have no seniors, if I'm not leaving anybody out. And then even if you get some grad transfers, they'll be new to you in the fall. How can those older guys playing for a new position coach and a new coordinator and a new head coach help mentor some of the young guys as they try to catch up to what your guys have done this spring?
Yeah. And I think it'll be a bit of, investment. We're going to have a ton of one-on-one meetings. We're going to have a ton of, circling back around and watching the spring. And if those older guys, they need to be able to watch themselves, and they need to be able to learn what they did wrong, and they needed to set an example for the younger guys quick. And so, the benefit for them is they've had experience, and they can learn faster probably than the younger guys, and they can handle the blunt of it better than the younger guys, so they'll be able to actually set an example for those younger guys. But I think the key is, how hard they work in the summer, and how coachable they are after we put all this stuff that we put together in the spring and learn from it. And, it's hard to be a leader when you haven't been the guy, when you haven't taken this thing over and proven it day in and day out on the field. And so I think they understand that. So they're going to have to lead by example early on. They're going to have to lead with work ethic and buying in, and with doing all the little things right, being on time, just being a consistent guy, and until they prove it, until they are that guy and doing it all the time in practice, it's hard to talk, so they just got to lead by example.
Some receivers coaches have a clear delineation between outside guys and slot receivers, and some believe in sort of cross training, so you can take your 6'4" receiver and put him in the slot and create mismatches, or move guys from the left side to the right side. Where do you fall on this? Do you have clear separation of groups, or do you think all of them should be able to play all the receiver spots in your offense?
I think based on skill set and how the offense is designed, you have certain players set in certain positions. But that's the fun part about receivers and figuring out an offense in general, is there's all kinds of receivers. Size and speed, athleticism, flexibility. And so I think that's the really fun part, is is putting him in there, thinking where you think they belong, and then having them go and learn and figure it out, and then really figure out exactly where everyone goes. And I think if you can put the guys in the right place, not only will they be successful, but the offense will be, it'll run, banging on every cylinder. So, and that's what makes it fun, and it's hard. It really is hard to figure out, who is good at what, especially when, you don't have a bunch of film on these guys. All you have is our high school film, and so I think we got a really good idea of who's going to play where. And we'll have an even better idea when, all the other guys come in the summer and start rotating and repping, and we figure out, what they can and can't do. But it is hard. It takes time.
We mentioned James Prochet and the numbers he brings back from last year, but as you said, some of these other guys have really impressed you with their work ethic and their hunger and all that. So now that you just finished your final spring practice, and acknowledging the fact that some of your guys are out with injuries or rehabbing injuries, who did impress you this spring?
I will say by far, I'm not going to say by far, the most consistent guy was Tyler Page. And I think coming out of spring, he was our best receiver. And it wasn't because he's more athletic than everybody and that he's just running by people. I think to be a really good receiver, you have to be consistent. You have to earn the trust of the quarterback. If he believes you're going to be where you're supposed to be, when you're supposed to be there, he's going to throw you the ball. And so he was by far the most consistent guy. He didn't have many drops. He played hard. He came to work every single day. He ran full speed routes as hard as he could every single day. And the quarterback just learned to trust him and just started throwing him the ball every day. Every practice. And so what made him good wasn't his athleticism but his consistency, and he was very coachable, and he's eager, and he understands that it's not about necessarily being more athletic than these guys. It's about being trustworthy and accountable, and I think he's going to be a very dependable guy, and he's going to you go back to guys like Danny Amendola and Wes Welker and Julian Edelman. The reason they're good is because they're consistent and they bring it every day and they work and they have this chip on their shoulder to be really, really great. And they never feel like they've arrived. And I think he has that kind of mentality. He has that mindset where, he wants to be better every day. He's always asking questions, and it was impressive to watch him from day one to now, and how much the quarterback just started throwing him the ball. And then other guys that really got better, Judah Bell. He's got a long way to go, but he brought it with a great mindset. He's only a freshman, and he's trying to block, linebackers that are twice his weight, and he stays after every practice and works, and he's got just like a yes sir mentality, and he's got a bright future if he stays at it. And then Brandon Benson is he's a guy that brings it every day. I don't think he really knows how good he can be yet, but he wants it. He just needs to understand how much work he has to put in to get it. And if he does it and he puts it in, and he learns from the spring, he goes back and he watches himself and really sees what he can get better at and work on it this summer, he'll be a great player. Those are the three that first pop out.
There are some coaches who intentionally go recruit quarterbacks and move them to receiver. They're smart guys. They have the ball in their hands a lot. But when you mentioned Tyler Page, 2 years ago he's a quarterback. Last year he played under a different coaching staff, slightly different offense or different terminology. Plus 2 years ago he had a significant knee injury. given that transition from quarterback through knee injury to a new coaching staff to another new coaching staff, are you surprised by how much he performed and impressed you this spring?
Not really, because when I first got to know him, you can tell he had just a rock solid demeanor. You know, he he'd come in here with a smile. He's real personable, and he wasn't fazed by anything. You wouldn't think anything was ever wrong, or he was ever worried about whether he was going to play or not, or whether he could become a player. Or, you know, he's got this like quiet confidence that he carries that's going to help him. But one thing that stood out that made me, you know, assume or guess that he was going to be a good player is he was always on time. Everything we ever asked him to do, he did. He was always where he was supposed to be when he was supposed to be there. You can just tell he wanted to prove in every kind of way that he was accountable and he was trustworthy and that he was coachable and that he wanted to buy in. And that's what makes him good. Really. It's not, you know, it's not that he was a quarterback. It's not that, you know, he did this or that. It's because he's accountable and he does things right and he's consistent and he's the same guy every day and he's trustworthy, you know, and he cares. He cares about the team, so it'll take him a long way.
There's some coaches who talk about getting receivers in great shape and then rotating fresh guys in and out of the lineup all day long. And there have also been other coaches who want a clear-cut number one group and basically run them until their legs fall off. Where do you fall on this? Would you prefer to rely extensively on a lead group, or do you like to bring them in waves?
I've done both and they both work, you know. I think you just want to get your best players on the field, you know. And it's my goal to get every player that we have good enough so that I can get in the field, every single one. And so if that means all 8 of our receivers are good players, then we're going to try and find ways to get all 8 of them on the field, you know, because that's going to help us. So, to me, I mean, you just want your best players to be on the field, your most consistent and trustworthy players to play, and that'll help the offense.